Hey there, Brett Bennington here. What I want to do in this short video is show you how we can take the algorithms that Roberto talked about to calculate how many tables you would need to seat a certain number of guests. I want to show you how you can take those algorithms and very quickly in App Inventor use the algorithms to create an app that will calculate the number of tables. Okay, so first thing we need to do is start a new project. So we're going to go into the My Projects pull-down menu and select Start a New Project. And we have to give our project a name. So let's call it Party Calculator. Oh, we can't use spaces, so we're going to use underscore, Party Calculator. Okay. And that gives us a nice blank screen to work with. So again, in App Inventor, you have the palette window, which you drag and drop elements from to populate the little simulated phone or tablet screen. And so you can lay out the functional components of your app on the tablet screen. You can then rename those components and assign their properties. And then when we have our components laid out, then we will go into the blocks view and do the coding. So if we think about this for a minute, what do we want to do? What do we want our app to do? Well, we want to be able to give the app the number of people coming to a party. So let's say the number of guests. We want to let the user of the app type in the number of guests. So to do that, we're going to need a text box. And so we're going to go over to the palette window, and we're going to grab a text box and take it and drag it in and drop it onto the little virtual phone there. Another thing that we can do is we can, before we go much further, we can set up our tablet to show us what we're building as we build it in App Inventor. And you can do that by connecting your tablet directly. Just to simplify things, what I've decided to do is use the emulator. So I have the emulator running already, and I can bring it to the foreground here. So in the emulator, which is sort of, a virtual phone running on my computer, we see the text box appear, and it contains a hint, or at least a place we can put a hint for text box 1. All right, so we will periodically take a look at the emulator to kind of see what we're doing. So we want the user to be able to type in the number of guests coming to the party. And then we want to click a button and have the app calculate how many tables are needed. So we need a button. So we go over here to the user interface menu, and we grab a button, and we drop a button in there. And if we look at the emulator, we can see there it is, our button. And then we want a display. We want the app to calculate the number of tables needed, and then we want it to show us the number of tables. So for output, we need a label. So we're going to go into the palette, and we're going to grab a label, and we're going to drop a label down there. And that's basically what we need. If we look at our virtual phone, we're going to type a number into the text box. We're going to click the button, and the app is going to spit out or show us a number on the screen, which represents the number of tables that we need for our party, given the number of guests that we put into the text box. Now, before we go any further, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. It's always a good idea to rename the components on your screen. So if we look at the components menu, we have text box 1. Let's rename that. So we highlight it. We can click on it in the phone, in the viewer window. We can click on it in the components window. Click rename, and since that's an input text box, I'm going to rename it input text box 1. just so when I look at that, I know, okay, that's where the input is going. And then the button, if we click on the button, let's rename the button. And since the button is going to make the app calculate, let's call it the calculate button. And again, no spaces, you use underscores. And then the label at the bottom here, well, that's not just a label, that's our output. So when you can use labels as just labels, just to indicate the name of something on the screen, or you can use labels as output. If you're going to use a label as output, I think it's a good idea to label it as an out label. All right, so we know that the purpose of that label is to show some output from the app. Click OK there. And so now we've labeled our components so they make a little bit more sense. Now let's play around with the properties a little bit. So if we select our input text box, we have the ability to, we can pre-populate that with some text. So we could put, say, text that says type number of guests here, or we can just, let's say, input number of guests. And if we do that, you can see that that's what shows up there. If we look at the emulator, there it is, input number of guests. There's a slightly more elegant way to do this, though, and you can see in the properties window that there's a hint box. So a place you can put a hint in. So if we take the input number of guests, and I'm just going to copy, or well, cut that, and then I'm going to paste it into the hint box. You notice that when you do that, it doesn't show up on the screen in the viewer, but if we look at the emulator, the text shows up, you know, kind of ghosted in that box. And so what the hint does is it permanently populates that text box with what the user is supposed to put in the text box. Once the user types something, that goes away. So if we type a number in, say 33, you can see it goes away. But if you get rid of what's in the text box, the hint returns. So it's very useful for doing exactly what you want it to do, which is give the user a hint. All right, now for the button, let's give the button a name more interesting than text for button 1. Let's call since the button is going to cause the app to calculate, let's call that the calculate button. So we can rename that. And then the text for label 1, or out label 1, the component out label 1, let's label that with what is going to show up in there after the app does its job, which is to say the number of tables. So that's basically what we need, right? We're going to type a number into the text box. We're going to click the calculate button, and the app will calculate the number of tables. All right, now if we go to the emulator, we can type in a number, 33, click calculate, and of course nothing happens because we haven't actually programmed the app. We haven't written the code to tell the app what to do with these different components. So to do that, we have to go into the blocks window. So let's take a quick look again at the emulator and think about what we want to do here, okay? When we click the calculate button, we want to output the number of tables based on the number that's been put in the input box subjected to a calculation. So how do we do that? Well, we start with that button, right? That's the button initiates the action, right? So we're going to look in our blocks window here, and you have a bunch of menus for generic types of blocks: control blocks, logic blocks, math blocks, text blocks, etc. These are blocks of code that do different things. But a little bit further down, we have the specific components. So if we click on the calculate button, we see we have some code blocks that are specific to that button. And we're going to select the top one here that simply says when the calculate button is clicked, do something. Well, what do we want to do? Well, we want to write a number to the out label, right? To the output label. So if we click on out label, we see that we have this option to set out label. And if we scroll down, you see that there's a block that says set out label 1 dot text to something. So we want that piece of code. We're going to click that in there. So when we click the button, we're going to set the out label, which is to say we're going to put into the out label something. Well, what are we going to put in there? Well, let's take a look at input here. We're going to take whatever is in the input text box, whatever text is in, whatever numbers in the input text box. So there's input text box dot text. All right. So we could just click that in there. And so now let's see what happens if we, all right, let's see what this does. All right, what it says is when we click the button, we're going to set the output label to whatever is in the text box. So let's see if that works. There's a number already in there, 33. We'll click calculate. And hey, there it is. It appears. Right? So the app is taking this number and it's writing it to that label there. But that's not really what we want the app to do. What we want the app to do is perform a calculation. Right? So we want to manipulate this number based on an algorithm. And let's take the simplest algorithm, which was the one for a triangular table. In Roberto's demonstration, we saw that if you want to know how many triangular tables you need based on the number of people, you take the number of people and you subtract 2, and that tells you how many tables you need. So we're going to go over here to the math block section, and we need a subtraction block. So if we look down, oh, sorry, we got to go up. There's a subtraction block. All right, this block says take something and subtract something else from it. Right. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to take the number in the input text box and we're going to subtract the number 2. So if we go back into the numbers, we can just grab a number block here, and then we'll change the 0 to a 2, and we'll plug that in there. So now when we click the calculate button, we will set the output label to whatever is in the input text box minus 2. And let's see if that works. So we have 33 people. We click calculate. We need 31 triangular tables. Okay, so let's think about how we might amend or augment this app. One thing we might want to do is add some functionality and say, hey, we not only know how to calculate triangular tables, but we also know how to calculate how many rectangular tables do we need. And so if we go back to, well, let's go back to the designer, right? So instead of just calculating the number of triangular tables, as we've done, let's calculate the number of triangular tables and the number of rectangular tables. So we're going to need another output label. We can drag another one in there, and let's rename it. And we're going to call this out label. Well, let's call it out label rectangular, because that's where we're going to put the number of rectangular tables. And now let's go back and rename our original out label and call it out label triangular. So now those labels make a lot more sense. We know that, okay, this is where the triangular calculation is going. This is where the rectangular calculation is going. We probably also want to update the text that those labels start out populated with. So we'll say number of triangular tables there, and then number of rectangular tables. There. And take a quick look at the emulator, and okay, we can see that we've added that additional output label. Now we have to add the code that will actually do that calculation, because now if we type in a number, let's say 100, and click calculate, we're only calculating the number of triangular tables. We're not calculating the number of rectangular tables yet. So let's go back to blocks. Now, what we want to do to calculate the number of rectangular tables is not much different than what we did to calculate the number of triangular tables. So we can be a little bit lazy here, and we can control-click or right-click on the set block and duplicate it. That makes a copy of it. And we can use the built-in little drop-down menus here. So we can change the set to refer to the outlabel rectangular label instead of the triangular one. Right, and then we can click that in there. We still want to use the input from text box 1, but we need to change this algorithm, right? So what was the algorithm for calculating the number of rectangular tables? Well, you had to take the number of people, subtract 2, but then divide by 4, if you recall from Roberto's demonstration. So we need another math block here. We need a division math block. So we're going to take the number from the input text box, subtract 2, do that operation, and then divide by 4. So let's grab a number block here, put that in there, and put in the number 4, plug that in. All right, and let's see if it works. So if we have 100 guests, calculate, that means that we need 98 triangular tables and 24.5 rectangular tables. Now there's a couple of, and so it works, right? We have a fully functional app that does what we want it to do. There's a few more things we could tweak on this though, right? Because even though it works, it's not as polished as it could be. And there are two things in particular that you're probably thinking are not ideal. One thing that's not ideal is that once the numbers populate the labels, the text that tells you what that label is indicating disappears, right? So if you have serious short-term memory issues like I do, you may not remember that triangular tables was the first label and rectangular tables was the second output, right? So it would be nice to have a separate label independent of the number that indicated that the first number was for triangular tables and the second number was for rectangular tables. The other issue is that you can't rent half a table, right? Nobody's going to be sawing tables in half. So you don't really need 24.5 tables to accommodate 100 people. You need 25 tables, right? So a fraction of a table is not really helping us. If we need a little bit more than a table, we need a whole table. So we need to maybe fix that. Let's start with that. So if we go back to the our algorithm for calculating rectangular tables, you can see that because we're dividing by 4, it's possible that we're going to get a fractional result. We don't really have to worry about that for triangular tables. If we take a whole number and subtract 2, we're going to get a whole number. So we're never going to get a fraction here. But here we might get a fraction, right? And if we have a fraction, we want to basically round up to the next highest whole number, right? If we need an additional 0.2 of a table, we need another table. If we need an additional half of a table, we need another table. In the math blocks, there's something that'll do that. It's this block here that says floor, and you can see that this block has a number of different things you can set it to, and one of those things is ceiling. right? So what this math function will do is basically round up to the next highest whole number. So we can pop that in to there. So it'll do the calculation, and then it will round up to the ceiling. It'll go to the next highest number. Plug that in there. Let's check, did that work? Hit calculate. Boom, there it is. All right, so now it's telling us not that we need 24.5 tables, it's telling us we need 25 tables. Now to fix the other issue, we need to go back to the designer menu here and just kind of fix up the way we're displaying the different elements on the screen. So what it would be nice to do would be to have the output labels, which are going to show the numbers, and then next to the output labels, have just plain labels that indicate what those numbers mean. Now, to arrange components on a screen in any other pattern besides just vertical, you need to go down to the layout menu, and you've got some options. So I'm just going to grab something called a table arrangement from the layout, and I'm going to drop that under the calculate button there. And you just see a green box in the viewer window. But if you go over to the properties, when that box is highlighted, you see table arrangement 1 in the components menu. And then in the properties menu, you see columns and then rows, right? And right now it's showing that we have a table that has 2 columns and 2 rows. And that's pretty much what we need, right? We want 2 rows, a row for triangular tables, a row for rectangular tables, and 2 columns. We want the left column to have the number and the right column to have the label that indicates what the number means. So we can take our output labels and drag them up, and you can see as you move them around, the little blue boxes will visualize for you the 4 cells in that 2x2 table. So we'll drop the output label in the first cell on the left and the other output label in the second cell. And now we need 2 more labels. So we're going to go up to user interface, go grab a couple more labels, and drop them into the other 2 cells. Okay. And again, it's always a good idea to rename things to make it obvious what they refer to. So we're going to rename this first new label. We're going to call it label because it's just acting as a label, and I'm going to indicate that it's the label for the triangular number, and then I'm going to select the other label and rename it rectangular. Right. So we have our output labels and our regular old labels there. And then let's go select the label for triangular, and under text, let's put what we want that to say. We want it to say triangular tables. And it helps if you spell it correctly, triangular tables, okay. And let's do the same thing for the other label. We're going to call that rectangular tables, okay. Boom. Now, since we now have those labels, we really don't need all the text in the output labels. So let's change the text there, and let's just get rid of triangular tables and just leave the number sign for both of those. Whoops. Get rid of just the number sign. Okay. If we go look at the emulator, now we see that there's our input window, which nice and explanatory with that hint, the calculate button, and then number of triangular tables, number of rectangular tables. When, well, let's see what happens. Let's put a number in here. Let's say 100. Click calculate, and the calculated number of tables appear with the labels next to them. So now it's all very clear, and if you have short-term memory issues, not a problem anymore. Right? Let's do one last thing, just just for housekeeping's sake. Let's add one more label, and let's call this the title. It's always nice to have some text on the screen that tells you what the app is for. So I'm just going to call this label 1 title. And then for text, let's say I'm going to just call it not very informative, but just going to call it party calculator, or let's say party table calculator. How about that? And then because it's a title, I'm going to bump up the font size a little bit. So in properties here, we can change the font size. We'll make it 18. And you know, let's give it a nice, pretty color. We'll make it magenta. A nice party color there. All right. So now we have our label screaming at us in magenta, and all the components of the app. So I hope you found that useful. Quick demonstration on how to use App Inventor to create a very simple app to program a calculation. We covered some input, we covered some output, and a little bit about form and you know, how to take a functional app and make it a little bit more user-friendly and a little bit more aesthetic.